Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat, and today our guest is fantasy author Jay Willis, and he's here to talk about his book, Dream of the Sphere, which is book one in the Sphere Saga. So I'm going to turn it over to him now and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Yeah, I'm Jay Willis. I'm a fantasy author, as you said. I write all kinds of fantasy. I like to write mostly epic fantasy, but I also have a few children's books out and a middle grade book out. But the book that I want to talk about today is Dream of the Sphere, which is the first book in my Sphere Saga. I've been writing fantasy, reading fantasy my entire life. I'm an avid gamer, play Dungeons and Dragons. That's basically where my background lies.
Cool. A lot of authors that come on here are Dungeons and Dragons aficionados.
I've been playing
Uh,
a long time.
yeah, so tell us a little bit about the book and the series. What's it about?
Dream of the Sphere is the first book in the series. I like to tell people it's about wizard war criminals, a magic apocalypse, and family drama. The Sphere is world building part of my world. It was built 3,000 years ago at the beginning of this book to basically forestall magic, to suppress all magic after a magical apocalypse happened. And there's some mystery. I won't give spoilers for book one, but that as to what the sphere does, how it actually works. But the characters in this are battling the fallout from the sphere starting to not work and magic trying to creep back into their world, and they're trying to prevent another catastrophe happening, and so magic doesn't come back and destroy their world.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main character. What in the first book? What's she like?
Dashira Eisenhart, she starts out, and the inciting incident in the book is basically her brother, who's 5 years old. He becomes ascended to basically he's sacrificed and becomes what's called sphere blessed. The sphere takes him up, and he becomes one of the revered ancestors of the people in their culture. And her family deals with the fallout from that. Her parents have very different reactions. Her father's actually part of the priesthood called the Brotherhood of the Sphere. And her mother doesn't take very well to her youngest child being taken away from her, swept up, and never to be seen again. She kind of goes against the religious grain and the societal beliefs of their people, and her mother wants to free the younger brother. Dashira becomes the main character, the protagonist in the first part of the book, and trying to figure out where she fits because her faith and her beliefs are very, very well seated and very strong. And she's kind of torn between her father and her mother, who are at odds over the sacrifice of her brother, basically.
Yeah, I noticed in the blurb that the one of the main points of the book is that her mother is joining some sort of rebellion.
Yes, yes. The Covenant of the Shattered Sphere is a revolutionary group that is trying to free the Sphere Blessed, who are housed in what are called the Spires of Eternity, which surround the sphere out within the city of Keharna, and that's what the Covenant does. And her mother has to seek them out and do unspeakable things to try to figure out where these people might be and to make contacts with them in the underground of the city. And Dashira gets wrapped up in, again, the struggle between her mother and her father. Her father's actually rises in ranks within the Brotherhood of the Sphere, and her mother joins the revolutionaries and become at odds. And Dashira's caught in the middle. That's the
Okay,
family
so
conflict.
yeah, what were some of the inspirations for writing the book?
I would say, well, the first inspiration was actually a piece of digital art called Sunset Moon that I found well over 15 years ago, maybe even close to 20 years ago. Very, very old piece of digital art that had this giant golden sphere set in the middle of a city. And when I came across that a long time ago, I was just inspired by it. There was a story there to tell, and I had to decide what was in that sphere, why was it there, what purpose did it serve, and that served as the background for the story, and the story just kind of developed from there. As far as other inspirations, my writing inspirations, I read a lot of epic fantasy. Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. Those kinds of series. Those are probably the three biggest inspirations for this series. I'm not. I like Game of Thrones, but I don't go quite to that extreme in my reading or my writing. Um, so yeah, that's basically where my inspirations lie.
Cool. It's interesting you mentioned the art. A lot of my short fiction is inspired by different art and pictures as well. So that's cool. Someone else does it.
Yeah, I'm a very visual person. I like artwork. I like art. The visual art is very inspiring for me.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the world. Is it based on medieval, or is it a little more technologically inclined, or?
It, it's a secondary fantasy world. At the time the first book is set, it's medieval to late Renaissance. It would be the comparable period. The second book actually is set 3,000 years prior and goes into the background of the three wizard war criminals who actually bring about the catastrophic event that causes the magical apocalypse. And the interesting thing that I did with this, that I really enjoyed doing with this, especially in writing the second book of the series, was the 3,000 years ago, the world was far more advanced magically and technologically. And once this magical apocalypse happens, it sets them back. And once they decide to suppress magic, there are consequences to that. And it basically puts this world into a dark age, and they struggle for 3 millennia to break out of that dark age. And the Brotherhood of the Sphere that develops, it comes out in the first book, is actually trying to keep them at that level or suppress them and not let them advance anymore because they don't want to risk magic coming back into their world.
Oh, so that's interesting. So it's actually kind of a fantasy dystopian in the first book, then,
Yeah,
although you
yeah,
don't know that until the second book.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Oh, that's cool. I was wondering why you did that with we kind of put the prequel in the second book, because usually you see it the other way around in fantasy novels. So interesting. It makes an interesting contrast there. So what was the hardest scene that you had to write in the book, or type of scene?
Uh, the hardest scene in the book. Character deaths are always difficult. Um, Trying to think which one would be the hardest scene. Um, Probably near the end of the book, where the the fate of Dashira's mother is decided. Yeah, I don't want to give too much away, but she ends up having to sacrifice herself in some way, shape, or form, and that scene was kind of hard to let her go. Um, but then I know what happens with it afterwards, so everything turns out okay as far as I'm concerned.
Well, there's a good teaser. If you want to know what happened to the mother, go read the book. Okay, so what was your favorite scene or type of scene that you wrote in the book?
Um, I I really enjoyed the coming age aspects. Dashira becomes friends with three others that are a little bit older than her, and they are actually the friends are actually descendants of these ancient war criminals that are featured in the second book. And her friends are trying to bring back their their ancient ancestors, basically. What I enjoyed writing it was the development of those relationships between Dashira and these other three characters, because they do not get along at first. They're in kind of a magic academy setting. They're forced to work together. They do not get along, and they have to learn to get along, and they do learn to get along throughout the book, and they become the best of friends and become a very tight knit group. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed building those relationships.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about some of the secondary characters. Are there any favorites that have been singled out by readers?
Um, Not specifically yet. My favorite character would be one of the characters that's featured predominantly in the second book, which would be his name is Vrom. He's I have a passion for necromancers, some people think that's weird. But
No, I don't. Don't worry about it. I write horror, so yeah,
but
necromancers are right up my alley.
I don't believe that necromancy has to be bad or has to be evil. I think there are certain applications of necromancy for the good of others and for the good of the order, so to speak. That and that's and this character that I'm talking about, Vrom, he actually becomes a physician, and he leans toward the necromantic arts, but it's all in the sake of research and scientific progress and that kind of thing. So I really enjoy writing him. He's probably my favorite character in the entire series.
Cool. So, sorry, the noise distracted me there for a minute. What are your characters afraid of?
What are they afraid of? In this first book, they're afraid of magic. They're afraid of what the ramifications might be if magic does return to their world, because magic almost destroyed their world. So in the first book, that's the primary thing I would say that they're afraid of.
Okay, so if you were going to hang out with one of your characters in real life, which one would it be?
From the first book, probably a young man by the name of Arstal Axamar. He actually becomes Shira's boyfriend, love interest in the first book. They really take to one another. He has deep-seated feelings against his father because of things that happened to him as he grew up. And he's very glad to get away from his father when he comes to go to the academy here in the city of Keharna, where he joins up with Dashira and a couple of others. He's a musician, he's a poet, but his father has never taken to those kinds of things. His father runs a mining operation, and he doesn't want his son to grow up to be a musician or an educated man. He wants him to grow up to be a businessman and to be tough and that kind of thing. And Arsenal kind of fights that. So I like spending time with him. He's a very interesting character. Actually, he's featured in the work in progress that I have, which is the fourth book in the series right now. So that's probably leans toward why I would like to spend time with him, because I'm spending a lot of time with him right now.
Okay, so who would you consider the antagonist of the book, or is it more of a circumstantial sort of conflict?
It's very circumstantial, but the real antagonist is probably Dashira's father. Like I said earlier, he rises very high within the ranks in the Brotherhood of the Sphere, and he actually becomes the high prelate of the Brotherhood. So he's basically the high priest, the man who's in charge, and he's not evil. I like writing very gray characters. I like my conflicts to be very gray. That everyone's the hero of their own story. The villain thinks that they're the hero. I mean, in their version of events, their point of view, they're the ones who are doing what's right and what's just and what's good. And that's very much the case here with Hansha Eisenhart, who is Dashira's father. So he's definitely the antagonist.
Cool. So you also mentioned that you write middle grade. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have a middle grade book out. It's an urban fantasy, urban contemporary fantasy along the lines of Harry Potter. Though it has nothing to do with Harry Potter. That's just the closest thing I can think of at the moment. It's called Blood is Thicker Than Magic. It's about a young man who discovers that his family, both sides of his family, have magical abilities that are antagonistic toward one another that he never realized until he starts developing the powers of both sides of his family, where he can infuse everyday items and make them magical. For instance, he grabs a flashlight and he can make a flashlight into a lightsaber type of magical device, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of coming of age there. There's kind of a chosen one vibe in it, and I wrote it for my son. Of course, I didn't finishing it published until he was a little bit older than I intended, but it's okay. I still that was my target audience. Was I wanted to write something full of wonder that the younger boys could read, younger teen boys could read and enjoy.
Yeah, and every Star Wars fan is going, "Yes, we want the power to make a flashlight into a lightsaber."
Exactly. That's I've wanted to do that since I was 7 years old. So
Yeah, we actually did that for Halloween, only it was made out of a flashlight and a long strip of plastic, but
there you go.
yeah, but it was cool. So anyway, are there any other genres that you'd like to try in future?
You mentioned horror. I'm not a big horror reader. I in as a teenager, I watched all kinds of horror movies, classic horror movies. Um, the horror genre, I think, can bleed over into fantasy a bit, but that horror fascinates me. One of these days, I wouldn't mind reading more horror and maybe getting into some horror writing. Other than that, fantasy, especially epic fantasy, that's my bread and butter. That's where my passion lies.
Yeah, fantasy bleeds into horror quite a bit. That's kind of what I specialize in when I'm writing mythological and legends and monsters and things like that. So,
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be interesting. I'd like to. I like mythology, and a lot of mythical ideas come into my writing too. That'd be interesting to combine that with some horror aspects.
cool. So, I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Sounds good. I'm predominantly on Facebook. I do have a website. It's JS Willis, my entire name with the middle initial S spelled out, jswillis.net. I am on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on YouTube. Well, not YouTube, TikTok. Excuse me. I don't do much on TikTok. I haven't gotten into that as much as I'd like because I just don't have the time. I do have an Instagram that I don't post to very much, but predominantly Facebook. I'm in a lot of different Facebook groups. So yeah, and all my books are available on Amazon.
Oh, great. Thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
And I have linked his book down below in the description as well as his website. So feel free to check him out. And join us next weekend when we're back with another guest. And that's all for now.
Thanks.
Bye.